Hi, I'm Amy Orridmark, and I wanted to share with you my top 10 takeaways from MMS Jazz held in New Orleans this year from the first day. For me, the first day was a big peer-to-peer day, so I attended every session that they had for peer-to-peer. Two of them were hosted by my coworkers, and one was hosted by folks from Microsoft. So let's dive right into it. First thing that I want to say before we get into it is that peer-to-peer technology is a very complicated subject, and sometimes even the experts have a little bit of difficulty understanding what's going on. So it's just interesting to get different opinions and hear different trains of thought, not only from the speakers, but also the attendees, to hear how they're implementing things in their organization and the troubles that they're coming across. So first of all, we'll start off by talking about delivery optimization, which is Microsoft's cloud-enabled peer-to-peer service. Delivery optimization is something that's available in Windows 10. And Microsoft is doing a lot to enable more and more content. So Microsoft simply publishes content, it gets chunked and hashed, and then it's made available for clients. The clients will query the cloud service to find out who has the content, and the service will say, hey, here's your list of peers that are close by you that have this content, and they'll start downloading. But did you know that delivery optimization prefers speed over closeness? So sometimes when you think that you might be downloading a game and someone next to you is downloading the same game from the Microsoft Store, if your friend's computer is slower to respond, then your computer will actually go out to the delivery optimization service and download it from the CDN, because the CDN is actually responding faster. Well, it's not likely that it would be faster for a internet client to answer a request for content than someone that's sitting right next to you. It's just really important to understand when you think about how to implement it in your organization and why you might see DO clients preferring to go out to the CDN to get content instead of local peers. The next thing that you need to know is that you can actually pin content into your cache, and that began with Windows 10 1903. It's a really good idea because if you are doing Windows updates, for example, in your organization and you're using Windows Update for Business, you might want to pin that DO-enabled content in the cache and keep it around for maybe 30 days before it gets wiped out, because the default is 3 days. Then you can set an expiration date on that pinned content, so then it gets removed from the cache once it reaches that threshold. And speaking of pinning content, did you know that when you pre-stage content in Config Manager and then you kick off a task sequence, if you make a change to the package, Config Manager actually isn't keeping track of the version of what you're pre-staging. So that means if you've made a change, you need to pre-stage or recache that content so that the right package actually gets picked up. You could accidentally be referencing an older version of the package, and that could be pretty bad news depending on what it is that you're trying to do. Another really interesting takeaway from the community session is the thought that a lot of times Config Manager admins get blamed for network problems. It's pretty common, I think, for the network team to come yelling at the Config Manager admin first, when sometimes you need to take a look at other things that are happening besides just software distribution going on your network. Specifically, that you should not starve your endpoints of compute power, because the way that Windows 10 updates get delivered these days, it's actually quite CPU intensive. Because they are large files, it needs a lot of compute power to not only download the updates, but to also process them. So if you're using what we would call maybe like a dinky laptop or something like that doesn't have enough power to let the end user do some work as well as download and process updates, it could look like nothing's actually happening. So then the end user starts blaming the network, or someone else starts blaming the network, and then the network team then looks at the Config Manager admin saying, hey, what are you doing? When the problem is actually the computer itself. So it's something really important to think about. If you think that you're running into network performance issues, then definitely take a look at the endpoints themselves and can they actually handle what they're being asked to do. Speaking of network performance, if you have a really large package that has tons of files that are in it, you should actually zip that package so that it's just a single file. For two reasons. One, because you actually get better performance when you transfer a zip file, and two, you'll get better peer-to-peer performance if you are transferring a zip file. And here's why. Because natively in Config Manager, if you are doing a download of a package that has many files, Config Manager will create a list of the files that are inside of the package. It'll then randomize that list per client that does the download. So if you have 10 clients that are downloading a package that has a list of 100 files, then each client will start in a random order. And while that might not matter if you're just doing regular content download, it does matter if you're thinking of things from a peer-to-peer perspective, because it's really hard to predict what kind of peer-to-peer stats you'll get on a randomized list. So if you have it zipped, then each client will start to download the zip rather than the individual files. So it's a lot more shiny when you do things that way. So let's move on to covering the session that the Microsoft folks presented as well. So there were some great discussions in that session. It's really great to hear Microsoft's thoughts on peer-to-peer technology, what they're working on, troubles that they're seeing with customers, and also hear customers in the audience who I think are more likely to speak up when it's Microsoft folks that are leading a session than maybe they would speak up in a session with me and my coworkers. Although we did get a lot of good conversation from the session that Andreas and Phil were hosting today. And the first takeaway that I wanted to bring up is a really good point that Danny made, and that's that it's really important to set the group ID, which is a GUID, as well as the download mode. So you're telling delivery optimization how to download the content and who is allowed to share with who in the given scenario. Most organizations are going to want to choose download mode 2 and set a group ID. We have information on our website, and you can also do tons of searching, both Google and Microsoft blogs, to really understand what the different download modes mean. But the main takeaway is that your group ID and your download mode are very important to set, and we always recommend a unique GUID as well as download mode 2. And if you went to Microsoft Ignite last week, you might have heard that Doink was renamed to Microsoft Connected Cache. So that is, we used to say that delivery optimization required an internet connection for all of the peers. And now what's required if you're using Microsoft Connected Cache is for someone to have a connection out to the DO service. So now you can delegate a distribution point to be the one that goes out to the DO service so that you can utilize DO in environments where PCs, for security reasons or other lockdown reasons, aren't allowed to go out to the internet. So content that Microsoft has enabled for delivery optimization can still be shared via DO for clients that don't go out to the internet. That's really, really shiny, and it's a really important step forward. And something that was really cool, a testimonial from a customer that they had shared, was that they had recently implemented Peer Cache, and then they had a catastrophic failure on their distribution point. So essentially the DP went down, but because they had already implemented Peer Cache, they were still able to do content transfers when content was requested because their super peers already had the content. An interesting point that David James brought up in that session is that a while back, the config manager team had enabled DO to start sharing content in chunks. So a file will get downloaded into blocks, and a super peer will download block A, another super peer will download another block, and it's divided into 4 blocks. And then once those downloads complete, the peers will share it. The super peers will share it with each other. The clients can wait for the super peers to finish their download, which means that if you are thinking about if a client is requesting content and you're worried about it going over the WAN, if you have peer cache enabled, then the client will know, I need to wait for my super peer to finish downloading this content, and then it'll start sharing it with me. So it's really cool that it can start sharing once it's downloaded its block. It used to be that you had to wait for the entire package to start downloading, so there's been some advancements in that as well. And finally, the last takeaway from that session is that branch cache is actually a really good technology to implement, and everyone should turn it on everywhere. While it might seem a little bit hard to troubleshoot, and it might seem like it's not very well documented, there's actually a lot of information available about it. And the best news about branch cache is that if it's not working, then it just defaults back to a regular bits transfer, which is really shiny. So if it doesn't work, you can still transfer your content. So that's all I have for today. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. I will definitely have a speaker with me tomorrow. I've talked to a bunch of different people about joining me for this, so if you wanted to hear more stuff besides just peer-to-peer, then tune in tomorrow, and make sure that you sign up for MMS in May. It'll be at the Mall of America. I believe it's the first week in May, not sure, but I can definitely link the sign up for MMS in the video description, and I will see you next time. Thank you.